For 11 months, my granddaughter and I slept on a pull-out sofa in the back room of the church, while my son's wife threw dinner parties in the house I spent 30 years paying off. She looked me in the eye at my daughter's funeral and said, "You're not our problem anymore, Hank. Figure it out." Then, on a Tuesday night in February, a man in a grey overcoat knocked on the side door of that church and asked if my name was Raymond Aldrich. I told him it was. He handed me an envelope and said, "Your wife left you something they didn't want you to find." 6 days later, my son's wife walked into a courtroom thinking she'd won. She walked out in handcuffs. "My name is Raymond Aldrich. I'm 67 years old. I spent my career as a civil engineer, 31 years designing drainage systems and road infrastructure for the county of Macon, Georgia. I know how things are built. I know how they fail. And I know, better than most, that the damage is never visible on the surface until it's already too late to fix. This is the story of how my family tried to bury me, and how I came back and buried them instead. My wife, Loretta, died on a Wednesday morning in April. Pancreatic cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the day we lost her. She fought hard, harder than anyone I've ever known. She kept her sense of humor until the last 2 weeks. She was the kind of woman who made a room feel warmer, just by being in it. And when she was gone, every room I walked into felt like a place I didn't belong. Our daughter had died 3 years before that, a car accident on I-75. She left behind her little girl, my granddaughter Becca, who was 4 years old and had nobody in the world except me and Loretta and our son. His name is Todd. And I want to be fair when I describe him because this story is not about demonizing my own flesh and blood. Todd was never a bad person growing up. He was always a little distant, a little more interested in appearances than in substance, but he was my son, and I loved him. The problem was never entirely Todd. The problem was the woman he married. Her name is Cheryl. Cheryl came from money, and she never let anyone forget it. She wore it the way some people wear cologne, in a cloud around her that preceded every entrance and lingered after every exit. She had the particular talent of making generosity sound like condescension. When she brought a casserole to Loretta's hospital room, she made sure to mention 3 times that it was made with organic chicken. When she offered to help with Becca's daycare, she always framed it as a rescue operation. She was helping us. She was so patient with us. We were so lucky to have her. After Loretta died, I fell apart for a while. I won't pretend I didn't. 39 years of marriage ends, and the only word I can use for what's left is silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that presses on your ears. Todd and Cheryl offered to help me get my finances in order. Loretta had handled most of that toward the end, and I'll admit I was lost in it. They sat me down at the kitchen table 6 weeks after the funeral with a stack of papers and a plate of Cheryl's organic cookies, and walked me through what they called consolidation. They explained that Loretta's medical bills had created significant debt. They explained that the house might need to be refinanced. They suggested that maybe it would be easier for everyone if I signed a limited power of attorney so they could handle the administrative burden while I grieved. I signed. I know. I signed because I trusted my son. I signed because I was 66 years old and exhausted, and the words on those pages blurred together, and I just wanted to sleep. I signed because grief is a fog, and in a fog you reach for whatever hands are extended toward you. 3 months later, I came home from a Sunday church service to find the locks changed. There was a notice on the door from a law firm I'd never heard of. It stated that the property at 2214 Sycamore Ridge Drive had been transferred to the name of Todd and Cheryl Aldrich as part of a debt consolidation agreement I had authorized. It stated I had 30 days to collect any personal belongings from storage. I stood on that porch for 20 minutes. I'm not sure I was capable of thought. I remember a neighbor walking her dog and looking at me and looking away. I called Todd. He didn't answer. I called 3 more times. On the 4th call, Cheryl picked up. She was calm. She was always calm in that particular way that people are calm when they feel completed by paperwork. "Ray, this is what you agreed to," she said. "The debt was real. The bank would have taken the house anyway. We saved it for the family. You can stay in the guest room until you get back on your feet." Her voice had that patient, almost sorrowful tone she used when she was explaining something to Becca. But you have to understand we can't just run an open household. Todd and I have our life, and Becca is doing so well in her routine. We don't want any disruptions." I understood then what she meant by guest room. She meant I would exist in their house as a courtesy, subject to her conditions, present when convenient and invisible otherwise. I understood that Becca, my granddaughter, my daughter's child, was now leverage. I said, "I'll figure something out." She said, "We knew you would." I drove to St. Andrew's Episcopal, the church where Loretta and I had been members for 22 years. The associate pastor, a man named Brother Chester, let me sleep in the room they kept for visiting clergy. He didn't ask for an explanation. He just handed me a key and said, "You can stay as long as you need to." That was November. By February, I had been sleeping on that pull-out sofa for 3 months. Becca was with Todd and Cheryl. I was allowed to see her on Sunday afternoons at a coffee shop 2 miles from what used to be my house. Cheryl always sent an update text afterward. Becca had a great time. She's adjusting so well. She asked about her mummy again, but we redirected. Redirected? That's what she called it. I had $4,200 in a checking account. That was everything. I had a 2009 Silverado pickup with a cracked dashboard and 180,000 miles. I had a cardboard box in the corner of the church room that held a photo album, Loretta's Bible, my old drafting tools, and the watch my father gave me when I retired from the army. I was not a man who cried easily, but some nights I sat on that sofa in the dark and pressed my hand over my mouth to stay quiet while the cold came through the gap in the window frame. You want to know what I thought about? I thought about Becca asking where I was. I thought about my daughter, who trusted that her little girl would be taken care of. I thought about Loretta, who spent 8 months fighting cancer while our family was quietly being dismantled around her. And I thought, for the first time in my life, that I had nothing left to fight for. That was when God or fate or whatever you believe in sent me a knock on the side door. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at the folding table Brother Chester had set up for me, eating soup from a can, trying to read a novel I couldn't concentrate on. The knock was quiet. 3 taps. I almost didn't answer. The man standing in the cold was about 50, trim, wearing a grey wool overcoat and carrying a leather briefcase. He had the kind of measured stillness about him that I associated with either priests or attorneys. "Are you Raymond Aldrich?" he asked. "The engineer?" "Who's asking?" I said, which is what you say when you've been burned once. "My name is Burke," he said. "Colin Burke. I'm an estate attorney with Hargrove and Lund in Nashville. I've been looking for you for 6 weeks. May I come in?" I looked past him at the parking lot. There was no police cruiser, no process server lurking behind a hedge, just a cold night and a man with a briefcase. I stepped back and let him in. He sat across from me at the folding table and set his briefcase on the floor with the careful habit of someone used to treating his belongings well. He looked at my soup can and my paperback and didn't say anything about them. "Mr. Aldrich," he said, "I need to ask you a few questions about your wife, about Loretta." I told him to go ahead. "Were you aware that your wife purchased a property in 2001 under her maiden name, Loretta Faye Denton?" I looked at him. "She didn't have property," I said. "We had the house on Sycamore Ridge." Burke reached into his briefcase and set a manila folder on the table between us. Inside was a warranty deed dated October 2001 for a commercial property in Chattanooga, Tennessee. A 4-unit mixed-use building on a street I knew, Morrison Avenue, near the river. I had driven past it 100 times. Brick construction. Good bones. She purchased it with an inheritance from her grandmother, Burke said. She kept it in her maiden name because she wanted it to be separate. Protected. He paused. She wanted it to be a safety net for you. I stared at the deed. I could see Loretta's signature at the bottom, her loops, her particular way of writing the capital F. "Why didn't she tell me?" I said. Burke was quiet for a moment. "The letter she left explains that. She said you'd ask." He handed me an envelope. It was sealed. My name was on the front in her handwriting, I can't fully describe what it is to hold a letter from your dead wife written before she knew she was dying. I set it on the table and looked at it for a long time. Take your time, Burke said, and he actually meant it. He looked at the ceiling. I opened it. I won't repeat everything she wrote, because those words are mine. But the part I'll share is this. She wrote that she was afraid of what grief would do to me, not because she thought I was weak, but because she knew how much I trusted people I loved, and she had seen, over the years, how Cheryl operated. She'd seen the way Todd deferred. She'd seen the paperwork questions, the conversations about family assets that started the moment the diagnosis came in. She wrote, "If you're reading this because someone took your house, Ray, I need you to know that I thought of you. I always thought of you." She'd found Bert 2 years before she died. She'd set up the trust. The building on Morrison Avenue was generating rental income, commercial tenant on the ground floor, 3 residential units above. She'd arranged for Burke to hold everything in trust until I could be located after her death. She'd arranged for him to find me. Cheryl had kept me too busy drowning to look for a lifeline. "How much?" I asked Burke. He turned to the next page. Net monthly income after expenses and management fees, $6,400. The building itself, valued at current market, $680,000. I set the paper down. I looked at my soup can. $680,000. My wife had built that, quietly, carefully, over 20 years, while I thought we were getting by on county paychecks and careful budgeting. She'd never been a spender. She'd never wanted much. I'd thought that was just who she was. It was. But it was also strategy. "There's one condition," Burke said. "The trust was structured to release the property to you outright, with no restrictions. But there's an accompanying instruction, not legally binding, just what she wanted you to know." He read from a separate page. "Use it first to get Becca back." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I'm not ashamed to say it. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. Burke connected me with a family law attorney in Macon named Prescott. And before I say anything more, I want to tell you something about what it feels like to walk into a law office after 3 months in a church back room. You feel like you're wearing your circumstances. Like every person who looks at you can see the soup can and the cardboard box. The family law attorney, a woman named Vaughn, didn't make me feel that way. She looked at my file and then looked at me and said, "We have a lot to work with." They had given Cheryl guardianship of Becca through a temporary court order, citing my unstable housing situation. That was the official language. Unstable housing situation, caused of course by the people now holding the guardianship. I want you to sit with that for a moment. They made me homeless, then used my homelessness to take my granddaughter. But here is what they didn't know. Loretta had left more than a building. In the same deposit box that held the deed, Burke found a series of printed emails. Loretta had been methodical in a way I never fully appreciated until that moment. For the last 2 years of her life, she had been quietly documenting conversations with Todd and Cheryl about the house, emails from Cheryl to Todd discussing getting Dad to sign before things get complicated, a message from Cheryl to a friend that read, in part, "Honestly, the longer he stays confused, the easier this is." She'd printed them. She'd dated them. She'd filed them in a folder labeled with my name. Bourne read through them twice. Then she set the folder on her desk and said, "This is elder financial abuse. In Georgia, that's a felony." I had the deed. I had the trust. I had the emails. I had Burke, who had documentation of every attempt Cheryl had made to contact the estate attorney's office, trying to locate Loretta's assets. 6 attempts over 8 months, each one stonewalled by attorney-client privilege. And I had one more thing. A man named Irv Cousins. Irv had been our next-door neighbor on Sycamore Ridge for 15 years, retired postal worker. Kept a garden that made mine look amateur. He and Loretta used to trade tomatoes. When I called him from the church room, he picked up on the second ring. "Ray," he said, "I've been waiting for you to call." He told me that 6 weeks after the funeral, he had watched Todd and Cheryl bring in a moving company and remove furniture from the house. My furniture, Loretta's furniture, and he had photographed it from his kitchen window because, as he put it, something felt wrong and I'd been a witness before. He had a time-stamped photo of Todd loading Loretta's grandmother's dining set into a rental truck. That set was listed in Loretta's estate as a specific bequest to Becca. It was not part of any debt consolidation agreement. It had been taken. Irv emailed me 17 photos. The morning of the hearing, I wore a suit I borrowed from Brother Chester. It was slightly too large in the shoulders. I didn't care. I sat next to Vaughn, and I kept my hands flat on the table, and I breathed. Todd and Cheryl came in with their attorney, a man named Garvey, who had the self-assured manner of someone who expected to finish early. Cheryl was dressed carefully. Modest blouse, pearl earrings. She looked like a woman who cared deeply about a child's welfare. She was good at that. The judge was a woman named Holloway. She had a reputation for efficiency and zero tolerance for theatre. When Garvey stood to deliver his opening, he made the same mistake that overconfident people always make. He assumed the other side had nothing. He described me as a man in cognitive decline. He produced a letter from a doctor I had never met. He submitted photographs of the church room. I still don't know how they got those. And he used the phrase unstable environment 7 times in 6 minutes. He painted a picture of Cheryl and Todd as reluctant heroes, stepping in to protect an elderly man and a grieving child from the consequences of my own deterioration. I watched Cheryl while he talked. She had her hands folded on the table, her face composed into an expression of concerned sadness. She didn't look at me. She hadn't looked at me once since we walked in. Then Vaughn stood up. She didn't start with the emails. She started with the deed. She submitted the Morrison Avenue property documentation and established, clearly and simply, that I had an asset worth $680,000 that had been generating income throughout my entire period of homelessness. She established that I had not known about this asset because the individuals now seeking guardianship over my granddaughter had kept me in a state of crisis that prevented me from having the time or resources to investigate my own wife's estate. Garvey objected. He called it irrelevant. Judge Holloway looked at him over her glasses and said, "The financial stability of the petitioner seems quite relevant to a custody determination, Counselor. Sit down." Then Vaughn submitted the emails. The courtroom was quiet in the specific way it gets quiet when information changes the air in the room. I watched Cheryl's posture shift, just slightly, just enough. The email to her friend, "The longer he stays confused, the easier this is." Vaughn read it aloud. She didn't read it dramatically. She just read it the way you'd read a grocery list. Flat, clear, unavoidable. I looked at Todd. He was staring at the table. He had gone pale in the way people go pale when they suddenly see themselves from the outside. Vaughn submitted Irv's photos. She established the value of the dining set and its designation as a bequest to Becca. She described the removal of that set as theft from a minor's inheritance. Then she called Irv to the stand. Irv Cousins is 69 years old, a compact man with a white moustache and particular credibility that comes from having no stake in the outcome. He testified simply, clearly, and without embellishment. He described what he saw. He identified the photographs. He confirmed the dates. When Garvey cross-examined him and suggested he might be mistaken about what he'd seen, Irv looked at him and said, "Son, I spent 30 years sorting mail. I noticed details." 2 people in the gallery laughed. Judge Holloway did not, but her expression shifted in a way I recognized from my years in county meetings, when an engineer's report came in and settled an argument nobody wanted to settle. She called a brief recess. When she came back, she spoke for about 4 minutes. I'll try to give you the shape of it without losing anything important. She denied the guardianship petition. She found that my unstable housing situation had been directly caused by the actions of the petitioners and could not be used as evidence of unfitness. She ordered Becca returned to my custody immediately. She ordered an independent accounting of the estate to determine whether the power of attorney I had signed had been used appropriately, and she referred the matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential Elder Georgia Code 30.5.3. She looked at Cheryl when she said that last part. She didn't look away. Cheryl's composure broke for exactly 3 seconds. Then she rebuilt it, the way a person does when they've had a lot of practice holding things together in public. But 3 seconds is enough. 3 seconds is the crack in the wall. Todd didn't look up from the table. The doors in the back of the courtroom opened. Vaughn had arranged for Becca to wait in a family services room down the hall. A court clerk brought her in. She was 7 years old and wearing a yellow sweater, and when she came round the end of the gallery and saw me, she stopped walking for just a moment, the way kids do when they're not sure they're allowed to want something, and then she ran. She hit me in the chest with both arms, and I caught her and held on, and I didn't try to say anything, because there was nothing adequate to say. I just held her, and I could feel her small back trembling, and I thought about my daughter and about Loretta, and about the specific cruelty of a world that makes a 7-year-old girl feel uncertain about whether she's allowed to run to her grandfather. "I'm here," I said into her hair. "You're okay. I've got to." She smelled like the grape shampoo she'd always used. That detail hit me harder than anything else in that building. The aftermath took time. I won't pretend it was clean or quick, because it wasn't. The DA's office opened an investigation 4 weeks after the hearing. They found that the power of attorney I'd signed had been used to transfer the house well below market value, and that a portion of the proceeds had funded renovations on Todd and Cheryl's vacation property in Blue Ridge. That detail, the vacation property, became the thread that, when pulled, unraveled several years of paperwork that Garvey had presumably considered airtight. Cheryl was charged with elder financial abuse and theft. Todd was charged as an accessory. Garvey quietly withdrew from representation before the preliminary hearing. The house on Sycamore Ridge was returned to the estate through a callback order. I didn't move back in. Too much had happened in those rooms. I rented it to a young family from the school district, a mother, 2 daughters, and a yellow lab that I met the day they moved in. The youngest daughter was 7, same as Becca. When she waved at me from the porch, I had to look away for a moment. I bought a house 8 blocks from Irv Cousins, a solid brick ranch with a yard that needed work. That became the project. Becca and I planted a vegetable garden in the spring. She named the rows. One for tomatoes, which she called Loretta's row. One for zucchini, which she called the Uddy ones. We ate from it all summer. The Morrison Avenue building kept generating income. I used the first 3 months of proceeds to update Becca's trust fund, the one Loretta had established for her separately, which Cheryl had known about and had not touched, either from oversight or from a rare moment of restraint. I used another portion to fund a wing of the Macon Area Senior Services Center, which provides legal assistance to elderly adults navigating financial exploitation. I named the wing for Loretta. The staff put a small framed photo of her outside the conference room. She would have hated the attention and been quietly thrilled about it. Burke came down from Nashville for the dedication. He stood next to me at the little ribbon cutting and said, "She would have liked this." "She would have redesigned the layout and made them move that table," I said. He laughed. It was a real laugh. "I want to say something to you directly because you've stayed with me this long and you deserve more than just the narrative. I am not a man who believes everything works out. I've been an engineer too long. I know that systems fail, that the math doesn't always balance, that good construction can't always protect against a bad enough storm. What happened to me was not the universe delivering justice. It was a convergence of specific, concrete things: a wife who planned ahead, a neighbor who paid attention, an attorney who did his job, and a judge who did hers. Any one of those pieces missing and the story ends differently. So I'm not going to tell you that the good guys always win, because they don't. I'm going to tell you something more specific. Documentation is protection. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Do not sign papers in grief. And if someone is offering to help you with the paperwork, ask why. Those are not romantic lessons. They're not uplifting in the way people want stories to be uplifting. But they are the lessons. Loretta learned them because she was paying attention while I wasn't. She saved our lives with a filing system and a Nashville attorney, and the patience to plan for the worst while we were still living the good years. I carry her letter in my shirt pocket. Not the original, that's in a safe, but a copy I had laminated. I don't read it every day, but I touch it, the way you touch something that keeps you from drifting. Last Sunday, Becca and I drove out to the cemetery. She brought 3 marigolds from the garden, one she'd grown herself, and she set them at the base of Loretta's stone and said, I wanted her to see the flowers while they were still alive. I couldn't say anything to that. Sometimes there's nothing to say. We stood there for a while, the 2 of us, in the afternoon quiet. The light was coming through the pines at that low angle it gets in October when everything turns gold. Becca slipped her hand into mine. Grandpa, she said, what was she like? Really like? I thought about it. I thought about all the ways to answer that question. She was like this, I said, and I swept my hand at the trees and the light and the marigolds. Becca thought about that. Then she nodded, like it made sense to her. And maybe it did. We walked back to the truck together, and I held the door for her, the way her grandfather always would, and we drove home past the fields that were going golden in the October light. And I thought that I had nothing much left to prove to anyone, and that this quiet, ordinary drive on a Thursday afternoon with my granddaughter in the seat beside me was what I'd been fighting for all along.